On the Surrey stretch of the M25, the two inside lanes of 4 closed anti-clockwise just after the M23. Recovery works underway following an accident as you head towards those roadworks, of course. And north of Newport on the M4, the westbound exit closed at junction 25A just east of the Bringlass tunnels due to obstruction queues back to the mega services. Southwestern trains are at a stand at Southampton Central due to a passenger illness, and Transport for Wales can't run Hereford to Newport. There's a tree on the line. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
We could be calling you with the news that you've won our latest Great British giveaway. An incredible £30,000 in tax-free cash. David from Kent was our last big winner. Listen to what he had to say about getting that winning call.
Hi, I'm David from Kent and I won £15,000 and it couldn't have come at a better time. I was gobsmacked. What have you got to lose for what it costs? In fact, I've done it again this week, so I'd recommend it to anybody.
For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2. Or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled. Lovely.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry. Tonight, the nation holds its breath as police brace themselves for another night of potential chaos on the streets of Britain. This is Dewbs & Co, the debate show that's not afraid to have the difficult conversations. So much I want to get into with you tonight before 7 o'clock. What is going on with these riots? Let's look again at the government's response. We've got really swift criminal justice now taking place. Is it all the right moves? We're having people potentially released from prison to free up space for these guys. We're talking about terrorism charges. Also, as well, I want to look at Nigel Farage. He's been getting so much blame from so many people. Is that accurate? Is that fair? Also, YouGov, a poll out. Let's look at how much people agree and disagree with what is actually going on in our society. But first, let's get the 6 o'clock news.
Good evening from the GB newsroom. It's just gone 6 o'clock. Your headlines. Police are aware of at least 100 protests and 30 counter-demonstrations planned for this evening. A list of immigration law firms has been shared in online chat groups as possible targets for gatherings, which the Director of Public Prosecutions has warned could be considered a terrorism offence. It comes as one case of alleged terrorism is already actively under consideration. Police are urging people to ignore the list of locations, telling rioters officers will be waiting. It comes as at least 12 individuals have been convicted for their part in the ongoing disorder. Speaking a short while ago, Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner said there's no excuse for thuggery.
I know that the public will be feeling anxious about the reports of potential more unrest tonight, but the police will be there to respond to any violent and criminality that we see on our streets. There's no place for that on our UK streets, and the police will do their job like they have done exceptionally well under very difficult circumstances like I've seen here and witnessed today what they faced, missiles being thrown at them and attacks, but the police will be there to keep the public safe, and there's no excuse for thuggery and criminality on the streets.
However, speaking last night, the former Home Secretary Priti Patel called for the Labour government to be more accountable.
This is why we have to have the questions, the scrutiny to the Home Secretary and to Keir Starmer, because actually the police need to have the tools, the equipment, the backing to police in the right way across all protests. Doesn't matter who, but literally all the protests where we're seeing thuggery, violence, criminality. Everyone that's involved in that, these protests should be policed. I've seen footage on television, I'm sure you have as well. I saw some on social media last night from one part of the country where I saw no police. I want to know why that was. Why was there no police presence?
It comes as the Metropolitan Police Commissioners dismissed accusations of two-tier policing, calling it complete nonsense. The criticism came from figures including Nigel Farage and Elon Musk, who argued that last week's disorder was handled more severely than it would have been if ethnic minorities were involved. So Mark Rowley's been addressing the claims.
It's complete nonsense. We have commentators from either end of the political spectrum who like to throw accusations of bias at the police because we stand in the middle. We operate independently under the law without fear or favour.
In other news, Shamima Begum's lawyers could take her case to the European Court of Human Rights after she lost her final bid to challenge the removal of her British citizenship. She'd originally had her passport removed after joining so-called Islamic State as a teenager in 2015. A judge has ruled she can't bring the case to court again, suggesting it could be argued the 24-year-old had been the author of her own misfortune. Following the ruling, Miss Begum's lawyers said they will take every possible legal step on her behalf, including a petition to Strasbourg. In the US, Kamala Harris says Tim Walz is the vice president America deserves after officially unveiling him as her running mate at a campaign rally. The Democratic presidential nominee says she chose the Minnesota governor because he's a fighter for the middle class and called him a patriot. The former teacher is considered a more progressive choice with voters. Children in England will need to be seen by a GP and a mental health specialist or a paediatrician before being referred for gender care. The NHS says the system has to be transformed after a major review found young people were being let down by a lack of research on medical interventions. Freedom of Information requests reveal the youngest child on the national waiting list is under 5 years old. And Team GB have surpassed their 1,000th Olympic medal today in the history of the Games. Great Britain's Ethan Hayter, Dan Bingham, Charlie Tanfield, Ethan Vernon and Ollie Wood have won a silver medal in the men's team pursuit at the Paris Games. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sophia Wensler, more in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you very much for that. I am Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company until 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, I've got my panel, the co-founder of Novara Media, Aaron Bastani, and the Conservative commentator, Alex Dean. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening
to both
to you.
of you. You're very welcome tonight. And you know the drill date on this programme. Well, maybe you don't if you're new, quite frankly. So I'll just indulge myself and explain. You know, we are a debate programme. I will not shy away from difficult conversations that I know that many of you are having in your own homes, in the pubs, and out there more broadly in society. It's not just about us three in this studio. I really do like to make you guys and your opinions and your views very central to the conversations that we are having tonight. And I also want to reassure you, I get so many emails whilst I'm on air, but I always make the effort to read all of your comments to me throughout the course of the evening. So whatever you're saying, I assure you it doesn't go on deaf ears. You can get in touch with me all the usual ways. So you can email me, gbviews@gbnews.com. gbnews.com. You can go to gbnews.com/yoursay, which is the website, and you can talk to me and each other there, or of course you can tweet or X me. But wherever you're watching or listening, you are very, very welcome tonight. Now, sadly, unfortunately, I would love to be here sitting with you tonight saying, wonderful peace restored to the nation. Everyone moves forward with unity and harmony. Unfortunately, that's not the story of the evening, because we've got 6,000 police officers on standby again tonight. There's so many rumours about protests, riots, all kind of events taking place up and down the country, multiple reports of different counter-protests and so on and so forth. So tonight, it's feared. I mean, I hope it's wrong. I would love to be sitting here tomorrow saying, the whole evening passed without any incident and let's talk about other things. But I'm not sure that will be the case. What's your reaction to some of the goings-on so far?
Well, I share your hope that nothing untoward occurs, of course. I think all decent-minded people of whatever political persuasion do. But it's very difficult to deny we've come to a point where people no longer feel, for whatever reason, that they're being listened to in British society. And the first thing to say is that there's no excuse or reason to resort to violence at all. And so that's not a but or wait for the next part. That's an absolute, in my view. Mm-hmm. Once you've said that, you can also think that we've got a problem in this country with politics, and we've got a problem in this country with immigration. You can think those things at the same time. You can think violence is completely wrong, and you can think we've also got a problem with the number one concern that people say when polled they're concerned about. You can think that at the same time, and indeed I do.
Aaron?
Well, there's just so much to say, isn't there? Look,
we've got till 7 o'clock.
Many people involved in these riots, this disorder, many of them will be very ideological, many of them just won't be particularly nice people, many of them deserve the book thrown at them. There'll also be others who just happen to be there, interested. I mean, we've seen the live streams where people say, I don't agree with this, or this is awful. So merely being present at something doesn't mean you necessarily agree with it. And with any widespread disorder like this, just like in 2011, they are not ideologically homogenous. They don't all agree on everything. Mm-hmm. Even though the media likes to often, not that you would ever do that, Michelle, but the media generally has a habit of saying all these people agree on this, they all think that, they're all of the same mind. That's simply not the case. For people watching or listening to this who are considering going out onto these protests, I would just say to you, don't. Don't. Because already we're getting stories of people going into magistrates' courts, getting 2, 3, 4 years for violent disorder and other similar charges. These people have, in some cases, thrown their futures away for absolutely nothing. If you have a particular set of views on immigration or asylum, we have a democratic political system for that. Nigel Farage is now an MP, for goodness sake. That is the way to proceed.
Oh, and come off it.
No, I think that's a fair point.
Yeah, and that would be a really, really fair point if what you were saying was actually honoured. So if we had a democratic system where people do have a viewpoint, which is actually, I'm concerned about uncontrolled immigration, I'm concerned about things like stopping the boats. If we had a democratic system that actually registered those opinions, acted on those desires and actually did what they promised to do. Yeah. So therefore, if you are someone of the ilk that wants to control immigration, people would argue, well, we've been voting for that democratically since the likes of 2010, and each and every twist and turn, not only has that viewpoint not been respected democratically, it's been ripped up, thrown in people's faces, essentially laughed at and smeared, and the exact opposite has happened.
Well, I wouldn't go laughed at and smeared. What I'd say is, and Alex maybe won't like this, but that is squarely on the Conservative Party, and that's why they were punished by so many of their natural voters in the last general election. That's why Reform got the vote share that they did, because, as you've said, for 14 years, the Conservatives said we're going to reduce immigration, reduce immigration, reduce immigration. They were very happy for migration to be a very salient issue. And what we saw under Priti Patel as Home Secretary, one can have no problems with it or one can be very upset by it, is 1.3 million net immigration over 2 years. And as you've said, if you're voting consistently for less immigration and then that happens, I can understand why you'd be rather flummoxed by the democratic system, as you've said. But that then led to a catastrophic result for the Conservative Party last month. And like I say, the best way to channel these concerns, if you have them, is always through the democratic system.
I agree with some of that. I half agree with it. Certainly the catastrophic election result part is true, notwithstanding some excellent candidates in specific seats. I would say that Blair's architecture of mass immigration is what began that, and the Conservative Party did little to nothing to unpick it. Mm-hmm. So I concede, if you're willing to go that extra bit and say it was begun under Labour, I will concede that the Conservative Party did not, despite repeated promises in manifestos to reduce migration of the tens of thousands, never achieved that or indeed came anywhere near it. So,
do you concede that point?
Well, no, statistically we know that actually immigration was very, until 2015, 2016, was very, very, we know what the graph looks like and then it goes up. Now, again, that doesn't mean I have a problem with it, but those are the facts. And what we saw after 2020 was record immigration. I think that's not, again, to explain or justify... So it doesn't start with Blair, no. Something very significant happens after 2020, Michelle. Something very significant.
Yeah, I know, but
Numbers-wise.
you had the likes of the EU being expanded to the Eastern Bloc and the decision being taken in this country not to apply any transitional controls whatsoever.
Yeah. We were the only place to do that.
No, we weren't the only place. I think there were about 4 places. There were such a handful of countries.
We were certainly the only major economy to
and it was a big mistake. So many people would say right back until that moment in time, that's what was happening. People would also say about the Labour Party, if it wasn't for the foreign policy interventions of the likes of Blair, you wouldn't have so many people wanting to flee their countries. So I think there is blame on both sides.
I've got to tell you, I think that whilst migration is plainly in play in the current political discussion, I think the thing that is exciting people the most is the perceived difference in the way that the police are behaving towards protests of different natures. And our Prime Minister's got to be very careful about this because as Donald Trump shows, assigning nicknames that stick in the public mind really work and really can harm people in modern politics. Two-tier Keir is sticking. Whether I was going to say whether he likes it or not. Plainly, he doesn't like it. Right? Whether the Labour Party think it's fair or not, that accusation of two-tier Keir is working against the Prime Minister. It's not a Conservative Party attack line, particularly. We're still busy trying to find our collective behinds after a remarkable shellacking at the hands of the electorate. It's everyone from Elon Musk to the guy down the pub with things like two-tier Keir. And the Prime Minister had a very bad start to his time in office, I think. So when Keir Starmer talks about cracking down on violence, he's absolutely right to do so. And as the DPP during the last set of real civil unrest, he knows what he's talking about. And I don't mean that in an undermining way. He's well positioned to do it. But he needs to terminate this two-tier label with extreme prejudice because it is sticking.
Should we just listen then? You mentioned Keir Starmer. Should we just have a listen to some of the conversations that he's been having? This is him off the back of a Cobra meeting last night.
I made it very clear on a number of occasions that those involved will feel the full force of the law. So we coordinated, we went through some of the numbers. Over 400 people now have been arrested, 100 have been charged, some in relation to online activity, and a number of them are already in court. And I'm now expecting substantive sentencing before the end of this week.
Well, after the break, I will get into the way that some of these people are being policed, the criminal justice system, whether or not it's the right process. But before I get into that bit, let me just pick up on this allegation of two-tier Keir. I mean, I learned something new today, Aaron. It seems like on an hourly basis, the list of what is considered far right in this country expands at a rate of knots. And I learned today, I actually saw an interview on this channel, to be honest, about the accusation now that even suggesting that there is such a thing as two-tier policing or two-tier politicking or two-tier media, even that mere suggestion is now apparently far right, which I, of course, find absolutely absurd. What do you think?
Is that a far-right trope, is it? Okay.
Apparently, according to many people today, yes, it is, which is just ridiculous.
Well, I think one can disagree with the assertion or say, well, I'm not quite sure, please show me the evidence, and not necessarily agree that I don't think it's a far-right idea. Well, what I would say is, as well...
Do you think it's true?
Well, Farage has said that it's since 2020. What I would say is my experience, I'm much more experienced with regards to policing and public protest going back into the 2010s. If you look at some of the biggest mass arrests in English history, Tower Hamlets against the EDL, 286 arrests, I think 148 at the Olympic opening ceremony, those people on the left. Ian Tomlinson, of course, killed just as a bystander in the G20 protest in 2009. So that, to me, doesn't suggest two tiers.
No, but that's the trouble. The Guardian used to say two-tier policing, but they meant it the other way round.
Oh,
they meant that it was against left-wing protesters. They meant that it was against ethnic minorities, on the basis of sexuality. The left used to talk about two-tier policing without it being a far-right notion, or without it being a notion that in and of itself was considered unacceptable.
One of the things that did make me chuckle, I will confess, I don't know if anyone saw it today, but on Twitter or X, whatever you call it these days, at The Guardian, I noticed that there was an article about two-tier policing and why is England apparently having all these allegations. And the community notes, if you know what they are, it's basically people like adding context or correcting things or whatever. There was just lists of all the times that The Guardian had themselves, to your point, literally been commenting on two-tier policing. So when you say the likes of Nigel Farage, we'll talk about 2020, what I think you're referring to is the likes of Black Lives Matter and that kind of thing.
That's his assertion, isn't it?
Yeah, that's where many people are actually saying that it was kind of around those times where we saw this whole two-tier thing. Is there any truth in that, do you think?
Well, again, let's just look at the facts. You know, that was during and in the immediate aftermath of COVID, if there is such a thing. And, of course, policing of public order situations was different as a result. In 2021, we had protests, riots in Bristol. Somebody got 14 years, and those would have been coded as quote-unquote left-wing protests. So, again, you know, I ask where and when, and invariably people say, well, it's two tiers between left and right. If I push back on that, they say, well, it's actually two tiers between Muslim and non-Muslim. It's only since 2020. So that's where I want real clarity here. Who are we talking about and in what time frame?
How about this really quickly now? West Midlands police spokesman on television yesterday with your esteemed rivals at Sky said that he'd spoken to people in the Muslim community and they told him they were going to police themselves. And he said that approvingly. Now, there is no policing yourself in a British community. That's what the police is for. That's two-tier policing.
Well, nice and conveniently, we have that clip for you, and I shall pay it for you after the break. And you can decide, because I want to bring you into this conversation. What do you think to this whole two-tier notion? It's expanding now, because it's not just the police that have been accused. As we're saying, it's politicians, it's also the media. I'll be playing that clip that Alex references in too. See you then.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Now, we've got a story and a half to tell you and bring you now. Our very own GB News political correspondent, who we love very much, Catherine Foster, joins us in the studio, and she's smiling, but she wasn't smiling for the past few days.
Two of her sons, Matthew and Andrew, were reported missing in Bali.
I got a text from a friend saying, can you give us a call, a bit worried about them. Then spoke to a girl they'd befriended who was in Sweden, but they'd met on their travels. And she told me that they'd gone up the mountain. By the time I found out, they'd been missing for 30 hours. They'd gone up the mountain on the Tuesday night, British time. This was the Thursday morning, without a guide. And they'd told her it was really hard. And she told them to turn back, but they hadn't. And they'd sent screenshots from this app with this trail that they were following on the app, screenshots of the app in case there was a problem, and a Snapchat of a Matthew avatar at the top. And she said, I know they made it to the top because I could see that his phone had nearly died. But the trail had actually closed many years ago. So the app, we will need to make sure that that gets taken off the app. But, you know, technology saved them in the end because it was the screenshots and it was the messages that they'd sent, but they should never have been without a guide.
But what were you doing during those 30 hours that Mum couldn't, when the phone died and Mum couldn't get in touch? Where were you? What were you up to?
Well, we were trying to figure out the best course of action, because it started to pour with rain. The amount of rain created a river, like a stream.
Yeah.
We were like, let's follow the stream downhill, and then the sun set, and we just had to, like, sleep in the bushes in the jungle.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Aaron Bastani and Alex Dean remain alongside me. Well, look, we're just looking at this two-tier allegation and suggestion. Many of you will be familiar, of course, with some of the goings-on in Birmingham. Although, actually, if you watched a lot of the media, you probably would have just thought that there was just a bit of a casual walkabout, nothing really to be seen. That was absolutely far from the case. We had lots of quite intimidating mobs of Muslim men, some of them armed with weapons, doing all kinds of intimidating things, from effing and blinding at reporters on live television, pulling gun triggers, it looked like to me, to cameras, obviously, of course, with their faces concealed, going up to cars. If it was identified that there was a white person in there, smashing up those cars and so on and so forth. Where were the police? Million-dollar question. Well, anyway, that question about two-tier policing was put to one of those police bosses in the West Midlands. Let's listen to how he answered the question.
We knew that there was going to be a large amount of people out on that counter-protest. We knew who the vast majority of those people were. We'd had conversations in terms of what that was likely to look like. And so our policing response was commensurate to that intelligence and the information that we'd held with our partners and communities prior to that event taking place.
It was you that actually raised that response.
I think there was another part where he said that they'd agreed they were going to police themselves, but either way, that's just not a good enough answer. I'm a member of the Church of England. If the Archbishop of Canterbury said we're going to police ourselves, he ought to be told by the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister, no, you won't. That's the job of the police to undertake policing. This isn't about white or black, Muslim or Christian. It's about the notion that there is nobody above the law, no community that can say to the authorities, we'll do this ourselves. And this is why this notion of two-tier is starting to take place, because you have police officers parroting that kind of language. Well, the community, this community told me it would be all right, so I didn't need to police them. I mean, that's just ridiculous. And once you start taking a position like that, not only do you undermine the authority that you have, when that protest or whatever the event concerned goes awry, then what authority have you got to go and police it when it happens? Now, I am delighted that one of the most terrible examples in that situation, there was a guy who was on the street with a full-blown sword because he'd heard there was going to be a far-right protest, which didn't actually happen. And he got his collar felt and is going to face charges. Quite right, too. My point is what the Prime Minister's now got to do is demonstrate that he and the police force acting in the United Kingdom on behalf of His Majesty to enforce law and order do so without fear or favour, and that they no more truck with people flying the Palestinian flag, God knows what that's got to do with law and order on the street in the UK at the moment, and wielding weapons than they have with far-right thugs. That's when you'll dispel the notion of two-tier policing. To put it plainly, people will stop saying that we've got two-tier policing in this country when you demonstrate that we haven't got two-tier policing.
Aaron Bastani?
So I think there's a danger here that people are going to draw an equivalence between what was happening in the West Midlands and what has happened elsewhere. There were some things that I saw which were obviously very bad. For instance, slashing the tyres of journalists, intimidating behaviour towards them. That's utterly unacceptable. But just to be clear, I wouldn't say that's in any way equivalent to arson with intent to cause harm to human life, which is what happened in Rotherham, for instance. And I think we need to be clear about the kinds of offences which are unfolding.
Well, hold on, because this is an offence in Hull, my hometown. Disgraceful, racist, horrendous criminal activity. There's a car. Yeah. These guys, presumably my fellow Hollensians, they think that there is, quote, foreign men in there, and they're battering that car, trying to get the guys out there. It is horrendous. It's racist, unacceptable criminal activity. The same event, and I shall try and play you that clip as well, literally the same event in Birmingham, you've now got this mob of Muslim men looking at the cat like, here we go, I'm literally playing it now. Apparently, because there is a, quote, EDL member, their words, not mine, inside of that car, they are doing everything that they can to smash up that car, get hold of him because of the colour of his skin.
Well, they're saying it's because he's an EDL member, which is to do with the content of his politics. But what I would say is, and of course that's not acceptable, and we need cool heads to tell particularly young men that this is not the right way to carry on. But even in the instance you just showed from Hull, that's violent disorder. And look, this is reflected in the criminal justice system. Violent disorder is a maximum sentence of 5 years. Arson with intent to cause harm to human life is a maximum of a life sentence. So there are a range of things happening, and I just think it's a bit unwise to draw equivalences between all of them and saying they're all universally the same. On the point of the police, look, I can't remember the last time
By the way, just to be clear, I didn't say
no, I know you're not.
Universally the same.
No, I know you're
what
not.
I said is there is now criminality. There's criminality all over the place.
The police have completely lost control. They have completely lost control. And what I would say is, in regards to, for instance, the two-tier policing, I'm left-wing. As you were very kind even to look after me when I came on the show about a year ago after I'd been assaulted on the street because of my politics. Now,
which is disgraceful.
Yeah, and the person who did that, nothing happened to them. Why? Because in the words of the police, they're having a hard time right now. And so I think we have a problem with regards to policing in this country generally, and I think people are looking at that through the prism of two tiers, where actually, no, we just have massive dysfunction with regards to policing. And look, it's not a story we're talking about necessarily tonight. There was comments made by a senior trade unionist within the prison establishment. They said, we cannot afford to have an injection of new prisoners like we did after 2011 because the prison system in this country simply won't be able to manage it. That's an extraordinary admission, by the way. We're a G7 economy, nuclear weapons, UN Security Council, and we're seriously being told that actually we can't pacify public order, we can't adequately punish people because we don't have the infrastructure to deal with the people breaking the law. That is extraordinary.
It's a serious admission of failure on the part of the state, and it's, of course, whilst the Labour Party's been in government for a month, it's as much to do with the last government as it is to do with this one. We need to build more prisons and we need to build more wings on the prisons that we've got. It's amazing to me. People like to point out rightly that whilst we get exercised about crime in this country, crime has been going down. At the same time, the prison population has been going up. No one seems to like to point out there might be a correlation there between those two facts because the vastly disproportionate number of crimes in this country are committed by a small number of ne'er-do-wells, and if you catch them and imprison them, perhaps the rest of us are going to be better off. Safety of the public being one of the reasons you send someone to prison in the first place. But I want to go beyond that because you were talking about not getting embedded in using examples and saying it wasn't helpful. Well, I'm not sure that that's right. I was the candidate in Finchley and Golders Green at the last election. There is a protest planned tonight in the patch in which I was a candidate, which states that its aim is to get fascists, racists, Nazis, Zionists and Islamophobes out of Finchley. There's an interesting word there that is not like the others. Zionists in the most Jewish seat in the country is not something I think is reasonable at all for people who would otherwise claim, I think, to have good intentions, the so-called Finchley Against Fascism campaign to have. And my point is that when you go around saying we're going to get Zionists out of Finchley, in the largest Jewish population in the country, I say that if you'd said that, if you can construct what the other way round might be, if you'd found a word that might be read as black people or Muslims, the police would take great interest. Now, I hope that the police are taking great interest tonight about what's happening in Finchley and Golders Green. And to their vast credit, they have protected the Jewish population in this country at their synagogues at time of prayer. It's disgraceful they needed to do that, but they do it, and they do it well and with good grace. I wish them well tonight in policing what's happening. I really hope there isn't two-tier policing of the kind we've been discussing.
When we were just asking then about people's views on two-tier policing, Aaron, one of the things that came through, not the only thing certainly, but one of the examples that people came up with was the viewers saying about the approach to policing the pro-Palestine marches every weekend. And there is a sense among many people that there is a softer approach to policing those people than there are other protests. People will give examples of, you know, know, what was it again, from the river to the sea, being beamed onto the Elizabeth Tower, Big Ben, essentially, and police just kind of standing by, and then people kind of saying, oh, well, to us, this sentiment means this, whereas to another segment of society, it is calling on, some people would interpret it as being some kind of call for genocide, and yet people would argue the police just stood there. You've had people chanting, calling for jihad associated with some of those protests. Very little seems to happen. You've had people waving and showing solidarity and support for terrorist organisations such as Hamas in those protests. And again, people perceive that there's a lack of policing there.
Well, people have been arrested for endorsing or supporting prescribed terrorist organisations because that is a clear red line where you can get somebody.
Well, we had the girls, didn't we, with the was it the parachute? Remember, that was it. Yeah, they were. So yeah, you're absolutely right. There has been.
Which, by the way, I wouldn't include it in that. I thought I thought it was a distasteful thing they did at the time. I've been criticised by many people from all sides, but I certainly don't think that merits prosecution because I think you have a right to freedom of speech with regards to that. Hamas, however, is a prescribed terrorist organisation. I think you can say should they or should they not be there, but we have that line.
But they were glorifying Hamas's acts. They were glorifying Hamas's acts in what they did.
They would say they weren't. They would say they weren't.
Well, that's all right.
OK. Well, I suppose, look...
But other people have explicitly said, you know, I endorse Hamas, blah, 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 and those people have been in trouble. But I think we do need to defend, A, the right to free speech. We do need to ensure the right to protest. And by the way, Michelle, I said there's people I disagree with. That includes people like Tommy Robinson. And I think those protests, they were, for the most part, very legal, very peaceful, very calm. And I think it's... Again, I'm not saying you're doing this, but I think there's something strange going on if one is comparing what happened in those protests to what has been happening in places like Rotherham, Middlesbrough, Sunderland in recent days. We've been seeing widespread public disorder. We've been seeing the targeting of racial minorities in particular. We've seen the torching of a library opposite a primary school. We've seen somebody's pet stolen. This gentleman was at a shop. It was ransacked. His pets, his canaries were stolen. You know, I think drawing an equivalence between that and a protest that one might not like, I think, again, that's not necessarily all that helpful.
I had not heard hitherto about the canary loss, and up with that I will not put. But if that's I don't think, the relevant comparison. In Leeds, only a few weeks ago, when there was great upset about children being taken into care...
Hare Hills.
The police ran away from people taking to the streets. Now, you can make excuses for them and say they weren't adequately prepared for the size of community activity that took place as a result. But that's when people get concerned about two-tier policing. The police are so hands-off, they're legging it when it happens in Leeds, but when it's a different group having their protest afterwards, the police have a very different approach. My point is I want the police to be reassuring to the law-abiding and terrifying to the law-breaking, whoever the law-breaking are. Right, so I want more robust behaviour from the police in all circumstances. I'm not saying the police should back off these idiot thugs setting fire to things. I'm saying the police should be absolutely robust with them. I just think they should be equally robust with everybody.
One of the challenges that the police face, because, and I want to make this clear, I do feel like I need to repeatedly state my position, there is never a justification for setting fire to things, abusing police officers. I mean, I can't believe I need to say this, but setting fire to hotels with people in them. I mean, there is never, ever any justification nor excuse for any of that behaviour. It is completely wrong, it is criminal, and it is, quite frankly, disgraceful. One of my viewers has said, by the way, Michelle, so many people keep taking to the streets and saying we want our country back, whilst then simultaneously setting fire to their own country, she's pointing out, is absolutely ludicrous, and I agree with you. But anyway, one of the challenges that you've got is the riot that you had, that Alex has just been talking about in Hare Hills. That was all about these children that had been apparently put into care with some extended family members or whatever. And then the police and the social services had got wind that the family was trying to take the children out of the country. So then they removed those children into safe care. So this was then all kicking off about that. The challenge that you then had is when you had so much horrendous criminality and all the things that we've just been describing, the outcome was the police were then, the children were then returned to the family. So many people, and I'm not justifying this and I'm not suggesting that this is right, I'm just trying to explain mindsets. Many people then thought, well, actually, it's all well and good people saying, well, riots don't work. Evidently, They do. When we saw the people, the two brothers that was accused of battering the police officers in Manchester Airport, you saw the community then go to the police station, literally what I would say, dictating law and order and what the process should be, and warning that if these people essentially were not released from custody, we would see, I quote, it was something along the lines of riots like this country has never, ever seen before. Well, what happened next? You guessed it. Those people were then released on bail. So it's all well and good, everyone rightly condemning collectively violent activity. But then we've seen in different instances, I've just mentioned two there, where violent activity has got an outcome. And that is problematic.
Yeah, so on the case of Manchester, look, those two men they'll be processed through the system. That's going to happen. I think regardless of what one thinks about that case, the police officer in that instance did not use reasonable force. The reason why we equip officers with tasers is to incapacitate people in order to not break bones, not so they can subsequently break bones and kick people's heads in.
Agreed. But
So-
members of the public have seen videos of the brothers. I need to assume innocence until proven guilty.
Yes.
But everyone has seen the video that kind of goes before that.
Yeah, and we've got a legal system which will obviously look at all of the information and try to arrive at a fair outcome. In the case of Hare Hills, I think, look, this actually gets to a really important point about public order policing, which is that the system historically has been to take a step back and arrest people after the events. That's what's been the case for decades.
Yeah.
In the age of social media, that's clearly upsetting lots of people because it looks like inaction.
Yeah, well, there you go. Of course, that is the video that I was just referring to. You had that bizarre spectacle, by the way. I don't know if you saw that. I might come on. I might ask Alex about this. You're a qualified barrister. I might come on to that after the break. Did you see that? What I would call very peculiar press conference there with the lawyer that took place yesterday on that case. Look, there's lots more I want to talk to you about after the break. Blame flying around all over the place. Nigel Farage, for example, he's coming front and centre as to who people are blaming for all of this. What do you think to some of that? The conversation continues in 2.
Evening. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Tomorrow's going to feel pretty warm and humid, and after a dry start for many, it's going to turn dull, with quite a few of us seeing outbreaks of rain and drizzle. Not from this area of low pressure, but actually from this rather innocuous-looking set of weather fronts. The low to the north, though, is still providing some hefty showers across northern Scotland. Still pretty gusty here as well. A blustery night across the far north. Elsewhere, the winds are easing. There'll be some clearer spells. A few showers across northern England, but they're tending to fade. And then we'll see the cloud, rain and drizzle spilling into South Wales and southwest England later in the night. Quite a warm night here. Elsewhere, with some clearer skies. Temperatures, certainly rural spots, could dip down to single figures. So for many, it is a bright start to Thursday. There'll be some sunshine around. Still quite gusty across the far north of Scotland with a few showers. But for much of Scotland, looking drier tomorrow with some decent spells of sunshine. Will cloud over across the southwest as the cloud and rain spills into northwest England and parts of the south of Northern Ireland. A very different day for Wales and southwest England tomorrow. A lot of cloud, rain and drizzle on and off for much of the day, particularly over hills and around the coast. Whereas the Midlands and eastern England, after a dry, fine start, will just steadily cloud over. Rain trickling into parts of the Midlands, spreading across more northern parts of England. Some heavier bursts of rain possible later in the day. Not much rain for East Anglia in the southeast, just turning cloudy here, and the far northeast of Scotland also mostly dry. Temperatures 19, 20, maybe a little higher in the southeast. It is going to feel really quite warm and humid, however. The rain and drizzle will be still across the south early on Friday, but it should scoot away. Showers in the northwest, but for many, Friday's set fair, a much brighter day for Wales and southwest England for sure, with some good spells of sunshine and a fresher feel. Showery rain on Saturday, and it is likely to hot up again as we go through the weekend.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner on the M56 in Cheshire. A lane's been blocked off on the westbound exit Slip Road at junction 7, the A556 exit for Bowden. Of course, emergency services are at the scene of an accident. On the M40 in Buckinghamshire, the inside lane's blocked southbound junction 4 to 3, heading away from High Wycombe about a mile or so after the Handy Cross roundabout. I can see on camera cars caught fire in the inside lane. On the Surrey stretch of the M25, the inside lane's blocked anti-clockwise after 13, just off the Staines bypass following an accident. And in East Sussex, the A21 is closed midway between Lamberhurst and the Hawkhurst exit at the scene of a two-car collision. In Somerset, well, northwest of Bristol, more precisely, the A369 at Portishead blocked by an accident, and on London Underground, Holloway Road station is closed for overcrowding. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company until 7 o'clock tonight. Thank you for joining us. Alongside me, I've got the co-founder of Novara Media, Aaron Bastani, and the Conservative commentator, Alex Dean. Now, just before we went to the break there, we was just touching upon that issue in Manchester Airport. I will just play you a brief clip in case you missed that press conference yesterday. Listen.
Ahmad and his mother, Shamim, were shocked at the unnecessary aggression and violence, alleged violence, shown from the start. There was no immediate attempt to speak to Fire, to ask him to step aside, to caution him, or to simply say, can we speak to you for a second?
Obviously, I've got to remind everyone that these fellas are out on bail at the moment.
Yeah.
You're a barrister.
His clients are entitled to the presumption of innocence like anyone else appearing before the courts. I was never instructed by a solicitor who gave press conferences like that, nor would I like to. The first reason is that it makes the defence of that person in court, I would say, rather more difficult. The first reason for that is the jury will be asked, are you able to make a decision about this set of defendants fairly and without concern about prior facts or about the case? Are you able to approach it reasonably? Well, one way or another, somebody in a jury pool may have watched that footage and thought either, fantastic, I agree with you, or appalling, I think what you're saying is rubbish. Either way, it doesn't help the fair-minded jury pool to be assembled. The second reason is that those are arguments that are best made in court. Those are arguments best made in the course of your defence. They're not arguments, in my view, to be made in a press conference. But be all that as it may, what happened in Manchester, it seems to me, was a series of unfortunate events, to put it most mildly. But one of the unfortunate things I thought was that people were shown selectively the clip of what the officer did. Now, I am not making excuses for that officer at all, who will, of course, face his own comeuppance for his actions. But what I mean is that the context of what had happened is in the entirety of footage that was readily available, and people chose not to share that wider footage. That is a decision, a deliberate act that was made to paint those officers in the worst possible light. Okay. Now, as I say, I'm not making excuses for them, and they will face their own decision-making processes. But I do think that the best possible situation is that none of the footage is shown. You don't get clips like this shown on social media for clickbait, likes and rage generation. But the second best thing is that people can see the whole thing. And we're all too often in social media at the moment getting the worst of all worlds, which is people deliberately and carefully selecting the smallest part that paints somebody in the worst possible light. And I suggest the images you're seeing right now demonstrate that there was revolting behaviour all round.
Bastani?
Yeah, it's social media is just not the best place to be having these kinds of conversations. And what I would say is, in defence of that lawyer, arguably, he would say, presumably, there's this massive public debate. You've even had Andy Burnham involved. You've had politicians getting themselves involved. And actually, I just want to put my client's side of the argument forward. It's already been heavily mediatised. It's already been, extensively discussed.
There's a difference between people generally having a view on these things and discussing them, like you and me discussing them, and a member of the legal defence team doing it. Now, it's very American, and maybe that's the way we're going to go, but it's not the way we used to do it in this country, because you're so closely and directly tied to the case that's being mounted that I would just generally, look, it's not for me to tell him, I'm not the Solicitors Regulatory Authority, but I would be surprised if people regarded that as good practice to give a press conference rehearsing partial points from your case to be made.
Well, it's a masterclass in PR, isn't it? Whatever side of the argument you fall down on, that is for sure. Many people pointing out, and I think this is a sad reality for many people, obviously not all people, many people pointing out that actually now they feel that there is a loss of trust in the police. And I think that's actually really quite sad, not least for the front line officers that actually have to try and deal with everything on a daily basis, because many people would argue that some of the priorities and all the rest of it, of course, are set from higher up, and it is the front line that bear the brunt of it all. Do you still trust the police? And if not, why not? Of course, many of them laying their lives on the line tonight and all the other nights. Goodness knows what the evening will bring. Look, let's talk, shall we, about Nigel Farage after the break. He coming under a lot of fire and criticism at the moment. Is it fair or not? You tell me.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Alex, can you tell us about Tom Cruise's diet?
Tom Cruise's diet, I mean, so there was the story today in the Daily Mail talking about the fact that obviously, you know, the guy has a very, very strict diet. He pretty much has no alcohol in his diet, has very strict times he eats. He only eats meat and fish.
Isn't happy.
And actually, can I just say, I think this is very depressing. You know, life is short. I don't know why people have... And lots of my friends who go to the gym, they're absolutely obsessed with only having chicken and rice and barely any sauce on it. It's just, what's the point, you know?
You make a good point. Life is short. What do they...
And so is Tom Cruise.
They say YOLO, you only live once.
Yeah, YOLO.
But then you can live your life as you want to live it. So if you want to live it the healthiest person ever in the whole world, then, you know, that's your one life.
But you raised a great point in the meeting today, which is 64 old anymore? It's not, sort of 62. It's not old, is it?
No.
62 is the new 40.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, though, if you don't... Tom Cruise is a multi-millionaire. Doesn't he want to just, like, relax and enjoy his life now? Why is he still getting up at 5:30 in the morning to go to the gym and eating chicken breast with no sauce on it?
OK, Tom Cruise is another one of these driven people. Tom Cruise is absolutely 100% driven to drive a fighter pilot aeroplane. I mean, how could you actually learn to drive a plane? He is so driven, he is so disciplined, and when you're that disciplined, you know about blood, alcohol, you know, sugar spikes. I bet you he drinks vinegar. Bet you any money he's into gut health. I'm telling you, gut health is in. Everyone's talking about gut health.
But what's the point when you're 62?
No,
I'm hoping when I'm 62 that I'll just chill out.
He doesn't.
No way.
He doesn't need the money
Eat
either.
some
He can
donuts.
just chill. Like,
no, he
life
doesn't
is
want to chill. He so doesn't want to chill. I tell you what, in Hollywood, because my husband's a film producer, in Hollywood, you know when they retire? They're either 90 or they're dead.
Yeah.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. Are you comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister?
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, Michelle Dewberry, alongside me, co-founder of Novara Media, Aaron Bastania, and the Conservative commentator, Alex Dean. Now, there's so many people spending an awful lot of time at the moment trying to point the finger of blame as to who is responsible for what and how have we got here. Because let's face it, quite frankly, the easiest thing for so many people to do is start pointing it's his fault, it's her fault, because all the time that they're doing that, you know, they don't have to look inward and go, actually, what have we done? What have our policies created? What has our failure to actually govern in the way that people want, what has that created? Because those conversations are very, very hard to have. So instead, of course, it is just easy to go, it's him. He did it. The person that seems to be at the end of that pointing finger is Nigel Farage. You know, those allegations are coming thick and fast. Hashtag Farage riots was trending the other day.
Yeah, I saw that. I think James O'Brien's had to apologise for saying something like that. So it seems there are limits even for pundits like that. Look, I want to say this with the best will in the world and no offence intended. And I like Farage, and I've done his show, and we work together on Brexit and so forth. It's just not realistic to think we're going to be able to have a conversation about the merits of what someone has done whilst he's also a presenter on your channel, right? And if you don't say those things directly and frankly and honestly, then people
What do you
will
mean?
think... Right,
You think that we can't have a conversation?
well, I just think it's weird to discuss it as if, without acknowledging the fact that you're about to hand over to him if he's on at 7, as he is normally. In the same way I thought it was strange to have members of Parliament as presenters, which he now is, I think it's strange to try and pick over the merits or demerits of somebody without saying up front, this is also someone who's paid by this channel, who is a presenter on this channel,
Yeah, good point.
and is now in the news.
I just assume that everyone by now knows that. Okay.
It is right to say we're not having a conversation in a vacuum here. You're talking about someone who's a fellow presenter of yours on the channel.
That is a very fair point. And hands up, I must confess, by now, I did just actually assume that everyone would have known that that's where he was. But you're quite right. You've got to make a good point. Thank you. Aaron, your point.
I think Farage is carrying on like he's still just a GB News presenter. He's just a guy on Instagram. He's just a guy on TikTok. He's now a member of Parliament, and it's not good enough to speculate about something as serious as he did and then proceed to say, my source of news was this website and Andrew Tate. You're an MP. There's only 650 of them. It's meant to be high-caliber people. And I laughed when he said that. And I thought, wow, I thought you were trying to present yourself as a serious political figure. You want reform to replace the Conservative Party. Good luck if you're openly admitting that Andrew Tate is a source of news for you at a moment of national crisis.
I've just got to say it because Nigel is not here to defend himself. Let me just have a little listen, because you just mentioned this LBC clip, but actually what I will do, I will just go to Nigel. He responded on his programme last night at 7 o'clock here. So let's listen to what Nigel had to say himself.
Personally, I have to say I'm pretty disgusted by comments made by people like Andy McDonald from the Labour Party, Anna Soubry, former Conservative MP, broadcasters like James O'Brien on LBC, calling these Farage's riots. People saying, actually, I've been orchestrating, organising, encouraging the riots. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. And because of that level of incitement to hatred against me, I've had to have a very significant change in my security situation.
So there you go. That's him presenting that show last night.
Look, on the one hand, nobody should be making threats to Farage. Nobody should be making claims about him that lead to that kind of threats being made to him. And I don't think he's done anything to warrant that. On the other hand, he did muse, are we really being told the truth? And then said, I'm just asking questions. In the way that I've always hated conspiracy theorists on the left saying, what's the web of Tufton Street malice at play here? I'm just asking the question. And it's always the way that people try and make a point without being responsible for it, to say, I'm just asking the question. So, nobody should threaten him, obviously, but I do think he had something to answer for there.
Indeed. Well, look, your opinions will be divided on that one at home. I personally think it's always easier to point fingers of blame than it actually is, as I've just said, to look inward and say, actually, what has caused all of this anger on the streets of Britain? Because we hear, don't we, these labels of far-right this and far-right that, and everyone trying to silence and suppress people's concerns. Nothing, and I mean nothing, justifies the actions, the criminality that we are seeing on the streets of Britain. I want all of that to stop. I want everyone to come together. I also think, though, that actually what's been causing the simmering tensions, it absolutely must be addressed. And if you ask me personally, I do think that has been a failure of the response that we've seen so far. I would like to have seen something on that. On the two-tier policing, many of you got in touch with this exact same example, so forgive me for not reading all of your names out, but many of you are saying two-tier policing, Michelle, who on earth was ever arrested or charged or anything for the fact that we've still, to this day, got a school teacher in Batley, in hiding, fearing for his life. I think you make a very interesting point. Look, lots of people have got in touch tonight, chaps. They've really enjoyed the conversation that we've been having, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Many people still talking about this labelling, just this constant smearing of everyone with the label of far right. I don't think that is going to change anytime soon.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Evening. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Tomorrow's going to feel pretty warm and humid, and after a dry start for many, it's going to turn dull, with quite a few of us seeing outbreaks of rain and drizzle. Not from this area of low pressure, but actually from this rather innocuous-looking set of weather fronts. The low to the north, though, is still providing some hefty showers across northern Scotland. Still pretty gusty here as well. A blustery night across the far north. Elsewhere, the winds are easing. There'll be some clearer spells. A few showers across northern England, but they're tending to fade, and then we'll see the cloud, rain and drizzle spilling into South Wales and southwest England later in the night. Quite a warm night here. Elsewhere, with some clearer skies, temperatures, certainly rural spots, could dip down to single figures. So for many, it is a bright start to Thursday. There'll be some sunshine around. Still quite gusty across the far north of Scotland with a few showers, but for much of Scotland, looking drier tomorrow with some decent spells of sunshine. Will cloud over across the southwest as the cloud and rain spills into northwest England and parts of the south of Northern Ireland. A very different day for Wales and southwest England tomorrow. A lot of cloud, rain and drizzle on and off for much of the day, particularly over hills and around the coast. Whereas the Midlands and eastern England, after a dry, fine start, will just steadily cloud over. Rain trickling into parts of the Midlands, spreading across more northern parts of England. Some heavier bursts of rain possible later in the day. Not much rain for East Anglia in the southeast, just turning cloudy here, and the far northeast of Scotland also mostly dry. Temperatures 19, 20, maybe a little higher in the southeast. It is going to feel really quite warm and humid, however. The rain and drizzle will be still across the south early on Friday, but it should scoot away. Showers in the northwest, but for many, Friday's set fair, a much brighter day for Wales and southwest England for sure, with some good spells of sunshine and a fresher feel. Showery rain on Saturday, and it is likely to hot up again as we go through the weekend.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. The latest on that collision on the M6 south of Birmingham. West Midlands Police just updating on X that they've recovered the vehicles involved. All lanes back open between Spaghetti and Castle Bromwich, but long queues remain from the M5 and on surrounding routes. On the Surrey stretch of the M25, now that collision anti-clockwise south of the Staines bypass junction 13 cleared, but it's still queuing in patches back towards Heathrow. And in Somerset to the east of Portishead, the A369 shut off the M5 at Portbury following an accident, and northwest of Bath just off the A39, the A4 is blocked northbound off the Globe roundabout by an obstruction. Onto public transport on London Underground, Holloway Road station is closed on the Piccadilly line due to overcrowding. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Don't miss out on your chance to win a whopping £30,000 in tax-free cash to spend however you like. It's extra cash that could really make a difference to your coming year. You could find yourself on that holiday you've always wanted to take, buy that treat that always seemed out of reach, or just send some of those day-to-day financial stresses packing. £30,000 could be yours. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2. Or post your name and number to GB07, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up